I knew that I was never going to be happy doing the same thing all the time, which is why I chose family medicine. I get a little bit of surgery, pediatrics, women's care, a little bit of everything, and I get sprinkled in. And then depending on the chapter of life that I'm in, I can shift my schedule. I can do less. I can just focus in my practice. That's the beauty of family medicine.
When I'm trying to help mentor a younger individual career path, whether it be in the law or the corporate world, I'm always able to give the advice that, hey, you're young. You can make a switch on a dime. Yeah, you might have to take a step backwards to move forward, but it's possible. I mean, I did it myself.
Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. I'm Lawyer Nik. I'm at Dr. Long. If you haven't already, please go like, follow, and subscribe. As usual, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify. So you can either watch the video, you can listen to the audio. We're on social media. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. Go in, contribute, comment, give us a follow. We love engaging with our followers, and we love the comments. With that, Long, looks like you're in a different area than where you usually record. It looks like you might be in a hotel room. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, I'm stuck in a hotel. I decided to sign up for a leadership conference for my career, to kind of boost my resume a little bit, and it took me all the way to Chicago, our old stomping grounds. I've been here since Friday. It snowed this morning, so I'm dreading the drive back home, but it's about a 2.5, 3 hour drive from where I'm at to Chicago.
Well, that sounds really fun, especially with you being back in Chicago, and it is the winter time, and here in Texas, we don't get a lot of snow, so I'm a little bit jealous of you having snow. Is attending these leadership conferences a requirement for physicians and doctors, or is it more so you get to decide how you want to influence your resume as you keep building and growing in your career?
It's your own decision for your own personal growth. If you're looking to elevate in your career ladder, whether that's going up to medical director, turning into admin, CEO one day potentially. There's a lot of different levels of leadership that you can join. And this is one of those stepping stones, getting your feet wet, as you say, just to get an idea of what it takes to get involved. And I'm potentially looking to get involved in state level or potentially even a national level for my family medicine organizations.
Interesting. We have similar things in the law. Most of the time, they're tied to what we call CLE, which is continuing legal education. I think you have something very similar in the medical field. But you go to like a big conference, you spend the weekend there, you get to network, you get to learn from attorneys across the nation. You get to be brought up on all the recent case law or any new things that are going on in the industry. Every career has those. It's on you as an individual to really chase those. And I think that's a proper segue into our topic today. You and I have talked a lot about career. We've talked a lot about how you transition from law school or med school into the career. We've talked about PTO. We've talked about burnout and how to take care of yourself and your family. But this conversation today is going to be very interesting as we dive into the specialties and where you can specialize in the law and medicine and how that can shape your career. I'll ask you this question. Obviously, when you're working with doctors, there are a lot of different specialties out there. How do you, as a med student going into your career as a doctor, decide on the specialty and what specialties are available for you when you're making that decision?
I'm going to try to keep it as surface level as possible because we can get really in the weeds on the types and different kinds of specialties out there. And there are a lot. I was sitting there trying to just think off the top of my head on which ones, and I was able to get about 20, 25, and then did a little bit more research, and I found an additional 10 or so that I knew about, but I didn't even think of that to put on my list. So there's definitely a lot out there. But the best way to first go about this is defining some simple terminology. So one is specialty. So when we talk about a specialty, it's going to be a very focused area of medicine that they are going into, whether that is for a specific organ, specific patient population. That's what we call specialty. But it is very broad. Specialty could be family medicine. Specialty could be pediatrics. Specialty could be cardiology and critical care. So those are all specialties. However, when we now then turn it into a noun, specialists, then you remove some of the primary care specialties. So something like family medicine, pediatrics, those are all primary care. We don't designate them as specialists. We designate cardiologists, people who have gone into fellowships and done additional training beyond the residency as specialists. So specialty versus specialist, I just want to make sure we define it clearly because I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between the definitions. In terms of how and when you decide what specialty you go into, it's actually something that is constantly evolving and changing as you go through your education. The majority of us go into medical school pretty much gung-ho about a very specific specialty that we wanted to go into. But then as you go through medicine, as you're learning all the basics, it might pique new interests in you. It may bring out certain dislikes about a specialty. And then it really changes again once you actually start doing the rotation. So now you're actually physically going to and shadowing and working directly with the surgeon, with the cardiologist, with the actual physicians who are working in their field of expertise. You then get that full firsthand experience, and then you have to finally make that decision by the end of your third year because then now you're applying for residency. Once you get into the residency itself, you go through your 3 to 5 years. If you want to specialize even further, so say you are a general surgeon and you wanted to go into vascular surgeon, then you're going to have to do an additional 1 to 2 years of fellowship. So then you're applying at the end of your 4th year so that you get in after you've completed your surgical residency. And so there's a lot of steps through the process that you can decide and change. You can even change between, say you were going family medicine and decided you wanted to go surgery, or go surgery and then decided you want to go family medicine. There are windows in time that you can decide to switch that drastic of a change. It does become a little bit more difficult, but if you have the scores, if you have the networking and connections, you can absolutely make that happen. And I actually know quite a few people who have made drastic jumps like that from a very procedural specialty down to more of a primary care specialty and vice versa.
What happens if you apply for your specialty and you don't get it? Like, are you just working your way down a list and saying, all right, my next one was this and my next one was that? How does that decision get made?
So that is very dependent on what your goals are. Are you very committed in getting into that specialty? So going from medical school to residency, you have options. You can either focus all of your energy in applying to one single specialty, which is what is recommended. Because if this is what you truly want to do, why would you apply to anything else? But there are some people who may not have the scores. They may be a little bit more on the fence about what their application and what their CV looks like. So they will apply, say, top choice is surgery, but then their backup may be internal medicine. So they'll apply to both. But again, that is a lot more work on not only the applicant, but sometimes if the residencies catch wind of that, then they're like, okay, why is this person not committing fully to surgery? Why do they have these backup plans? Maybe they're not as mentally committed to the career choice as they ought to be. So if you don't match into that, even if you had a backup and you didn't match, then what happens is then you can go into what we call a scramble or a SOAP. It's basically where all these applicants who did not match and then all the residencies that did not match enough residents can go into this secondary layer of interviews and questions to see if they can find another fit at that point. If you're not able to match in that round, then your only other choices are find a different job for that 1 year, reapply the following year, or 2, match into a completely different specialty that you never even thought you would want to go into.
That's very interesting, the different paths, because it definitely differs from law school, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And before we get into all the specialties that exist in the medical field, I have one other question for you. What happens if you're in your career for 10, 15 years and you're specializing and you decide you want to make a career change, and now instead of being an oncologist, you want to be an orthopedic surgeon or you want to be a family doctor? Is it hard to transition since you've based your entire career on one specialization, or are there pathways to these other avenues of your career?
It is very hard because the only way to then now re-specialize in a different specialty is by going through the residency again. So even though you've already completed, like your example was oncology, if you've already done your 3 years of internal medicine and then you did your 1 or 2 years of oncology, hematology fellowship, you are now having to go back and do an additional 5 years of orthopedic surgery, because now you are learning completely new skills. You're relearning things. And so it is possible. There are people who have done it, but there are a lot of barriers. So one, age. You're going to be a lot older. Two, there are going to be biases. People are going to assume that you are not moldable. You are set in your ways at that point. You're coming from a different mindset. You're not going to be able to take criticism. So that's always another barrier. The third barrier is financials. You have been in attending. You've been working, making the top of your specialty's income value, and then now you're going to take a huge pay cut by becoming a resident again. And it's going to be like, I don't know, a quarter, a fifth, or even a sixth of an attending's salary. And so you're taking that huge cut. And so if you have a family, that's going to be a big deal because you're not going to be able to support, or you're not going to continue to live the lifestyle that you've been living on an attending's salary. So those are the four main barriers that I can think of right offhand that would prevent someone from doing that. But there are no special pathways. There's not an easy way. The only way you can go from one specific specialty as a physician to a different one is to fully go back through the entire process again and go through residency again.
It's terrifying. We've talked about it together as we were deciding on our career paths. We've both mentored and taught students as adjunct professors. When I'm trying to help mentor a younger individual career path, whether it be in the law or the corporate world, I'm always able to give the advice that, hey, you're young. You can make a switch on a dime. If you figure out that this career isn't what you want after 2 or 3 years, you can then move to a different career. You might have to take a step backwards to move forward, but it's possible. I mean, I did it myself. I came out, I did family law. I took the step back into aerospace. I took the step back, started my own company. So it's very possible in the legal field to pivot when you need to pivot. And outside of specialized fields like legal or medicine, you can always pivot. You can always find a pathway into a different career. But the scary thing, at least from what I'm hearing about medicine, is you're committed. You are building your career as soon as you hit, what is it, residency, and you're making that decision of, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And to me, when we talked about PTO, we talked about vacations, how we work our life, I'm very go with the flow and I'll pivot left and right. You're already very type A in the sense of you need to have your schedule down. You need to maximize your time. You need to maximize your vacation. And so I think that goes with personality type of, you're committing for such a long time that you're going to do this one specialty and you're going to become the best you can in that field. But it's a commitment. I don't know what I want in 15 or 20 years, but you really have to just dive in and say, well, this is my life now. This is what I'm doing, and I'm happy with it.
And so there's actually ways around that. If you think of medicine as a career choice, you don't have to necessarily become the physician. Now, if you are someone that doesn't feel like they need to run the show, be at the top of the chain or the team, there are other careers within medicine where you can jump different specialties. You get paid less, you get less responsibilities, but you still are able to change depending on the chapter that you are in your life. There are those benefits of those other careers. But again, that's just why it's so hard to get into medical school. And that's why there's such a huge screening process, is because we want to make sure that the people who are going to become physicians, and especially if they're going to be specializing, that they know this is what they want to do and that they're willing to make the sacrifices, because there are a lot of sacrifices. But for me personally, I knew that I was never going to be happy doing the same thing all the time, which is a main reason why I chose family medicine. Family medicine allows me to learn everything. I get a little bit of surgery. I get a little bit of pediatrics, women's care. I get OB, like a little bit of everything, and I get sprinkled in. And then depending on the chapter of life that I'm in, if I have kids, if they're young and I want more time at home, then I can shift my schedule. I can do less. If I get older and I just want to focus in on one thing, I just want to do urgent care, I can. If I wanted to, maybe in my 60s or 70s, don't want to deal with kids, don't want to deal with teenagers, I can do that. I can just focus in my practice into that older age group. That's the beauty of family medicine. And that's why I always advocate for people who are not able to decide, or people who feel like their personality is constantly change, and to have variety. Family medicine is perfect for you. And a lot of people think that the earning potential is low. Honestly, the earning potential is there if you find the right place and you're able to negotiate it and fight for your ability to practice the way you want to.
It makes sense. It definitely makes sense. That exists in the law too. And again, it's also steps of where you want to go in the field. Like from a legal perspective, you don't have to go be a lawyer to be in the legal field. We talked about this on one of our previous episodes, Tools of the Trade. You could go be a bailiff. You can go be a court coordinator. You can go be a court reporter. If you wanted to, you could go be a mediator. You could go teach. You can go do a lot of different things that aren't necessarily on you passing the bar and getting your law license. And so I would assume the same with medical, where there are so many different individuals in medical where if you wanted to go be a nurse, you go be a nurse. You want to go be a phlebotomist, you go be a phlebotomist. You want to work in healthcare, you can go be, the registration individual that helps, or the person that oversees the hospital. Like, there are different areas to where you don't necessarily have to commit to being a doctor if you want to be in the field. That's important for people to understand, where if you want to be in the field, you can still get access to the field without having to take such a committed approach. But the committed approach is fun. It's very fun, especially when you know what you want to do.
So in the legal world, though, as an attorney, how do you specialize? I know we've briefly talked about certifications, but tell me more in detail. Like, what does the certification require? Is it a time commitment? Is it just an exam? Like, what are you studying? What are you needing to do to focus in on that specialty?
Man, it is so different. We touched a little bit on this in our private practice versus corporate practice podcast, but you're sitting there for 3 years. And again, one of my major complaints, I'll get on my soapbox, is during those 3 years, you're doing your internships, you're doing your clerkships. But once you get out, you get out. There's no transition into a residency. There's no time spent at a firm trying to like learn what you want. In those 3 years, you're trying to figure out what you want to do. But the craziness is that as soon as you pass the bar, you are licensed to practice law. And whatever law you want to practice, you can pretty much practice. Let's take the approach of, I'm going to hang out my own shingle. Well, in law school, I can go through 3 years of law school, never touch a family law case ever. Never clerk in a family law court, never intern with a family law firm. And on that day I pass the bar, I can then say, I am going to open up a family law practice. And I can go into it, and it's capitalism at its best. I am either going to figure this out, or I'm going to fail and go out of business. There's no barrier to entry. It's, once you're a lawyer, you're allowed to do lawyer things, and you can do lawyer things in pretty much anything you want to do. And that's the cool thing about it. It's also the scary thing about it. Now, when you're in school, you're trying to determine where you want to go. You're trying to figure out also all these different avenues of law and specialties. I'll give some definitions just like you did. When you're specializing in something in the law, it just means like that is your bread and butter. That's something that you are very good at, or maybe the only cases that you handle. So if I said I specialize in family law, well, I'm most likely only going to do divorces and child custody and child support. So that's my specialty. It doesn't mean that I can't go outside of those bounds. Even when I was at the family law firm, we got a few contractual cases that were just easy peasy, that were, hey, this isn't family law, but our client needs some help on a contract. Do you want to work it? And so you can do that. There are other firms that specialize in everything. It's bring me whatever you have and I will work it. So the specialty, it's not as strict as y'all being specialists or having specialties, but there are certain areas that you need to get extra schooling or certification. So for instance, if you wanted to go into intellectual property and you want to be a patent lawyer, you wanted to help make patents, you're required to have a background in STEM. So in the sciences, an engineering background. You have to then go into law school and you need to pass the bar. Then you need to go in and take an additional bar exam, which is specific to patent law, and you need to pass that. And as soon as you get through that, you can go be a patent attorney. But unlike y'all, if I decided to be a patent attorney and after 2 or 3 years I said, I don't want to do this anymore, then I can just transition to something else, whatever I want to do. So that's one area that is the additional certification. But other than that, it's like the world is your oyster. You get to go do whatever you want to do. Yeah, that it's very different from medical. Very different from medical.
So then how do you gain the confidence to be able to specialize? Like, if you say you're coming out and you have a clean slate, you've never truly focused in on anything, how do you get that experience, that knowledge? Is it just by your own research, by your own ability to find out the information? Or are you assigned a mentor? Are you assigned someone? Or do you have to seek those mentors out? How does that work?
You really have to seek those mentors out. You are not assigned a mentor at all, unless of course you go with a program. There are some local bar associations. You can sign up and you can be paired up with a mentor, a seasoned attorney, and they will help you in whatever field. But for the most part, that's where you really have to focus on things during law school. Our summers are really big on internships. For example, I mentioned this before, I interned with American Airlines, and at that point I figured out I really didn't want to segue into corporate law, and then I interned with the Dallas District Attorney's Office. I realized I didn't want to get into criminal law. And then I finally interned with the family law firm doing litigation stuff. And I said, oh, I could do this. Sans me going to the FBI, which was the plan. But it was me dipping my toe in each one of those things during law school that helped guide my path outside of law school. Some individuals, like doctors, know immediately, I want to get into immigration law. So when they come in, they are seeking out any and all opportunity in immigration law. Certain law schools also have clinics which allow you as a law student to do legal work under the guide of a seasoned attorney. You're doing the work and the seasoned attorney is overshadowing you and watching what you're doing and making sure you're doing things right, and basically as the legal representative in that case. But those types of things bolster your resume to where when you get out, then you can feel confident enough to either apply for that job at that firm or you can hang out your own shingle. Now, as you're building up those situations, like for me in family law, after I did my internship at family law, I showed interest at working at that firm, and then I ended up having a job at that firm. The internships are very important when you're deciding your specialty and where you're going to go. You want to go with the places you want to work. There's one caveat though, and when it comes to big law, you have these firms that specialize in everything. They have maybe 100 attorneys in their building and they're in sections. So one section might be the family law section. The other section might be the, corporate section. Another section might be personal injury section. Sometimes when you're going to the big firm, the firm will decide where you're going to go. You're just saying, hey, I want a job in big law. They say, okay, wonderful. You're going to intern. You're going to go through all the different sections and we're going to place you where we think you should be or where there's a need. As our employee, we need you to do real estate law, even though you may have had an interest in immigration law. And then you have to pay your dues and find your way into that field if you want to find your way into that field. But then again, just like you said, you could end up working 5 years in real estate law and then realize it's going to be hard to transfer over into this other section and start specializing and then get the experience needed. I'll just stick to real estate law, and then that defines your career.
But I imagine if you were working at a big firm, that there are going to be a lot more mentors available who you could then, if you wanted to change specialties, you could reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Can I follow you around, get more experience with you, et cetera, et cetera, right? Versus you being a solo, have your own practice, doing one thing for forever. And then now you're just suddenly trying to change that narrative or that story or that advertisement for yourself. That would be kind of hard.
That is exactly right. You have the ability to reach out to those other sections and say, hey, I'm actually interested in taking this case. Do you have something I could help you work? And most of the time they want that. They want well-rounded attorneys, but big law is corporate. You're dealing with HR perspectives. You're dealing with leadership and managerial perspectives. You may not be at a firm where the culture is fit for that. You may be at a firm where the culture is you need to stay in your lane. But then again, you then get to choose, do I want to stay at this firm or do I want to go to a different firm? Or what a lot of people do is after a few years at a firm, they can then go and hang out their own shingle because then they have learned everything about that certain specialization, that certain category of law. And now they can take it out, go bill at their own hourly rate and not have to answer to anybody else. You have now just opened up shop.
Good points. That's what's so important when I talk to students, college students, medical students, residents is you really have to define what your personality is in terms of knowledge gathering. Do you want to be the expert of one thing and only one thing? And that's like everyone goes to you for that specific answer? Or do you want to know a little bit of everything? Are you a jack of all trades? And that's usually the first barrier to figuring out, do you want to specialize in medicine? Do you want to know a little bit of everything? That would have been probably more of a generalist, or we usually clump them into a category called primary care. So that's going to include your family medicine docs, your pediatricians, your OBGYN, and your internal medicine. Those are the main four primary care specialties that we think of, and they're considered generalists. They have to know a little bit about everything, a little bit about derm, a little bit about the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, so that they can be that first line of defense to figure out what's going on. And if they're not able to, then punt them over or refer them over to the specialist. Now, this is where it gets complicated because yes, the expert is great to have around so that they know all the little nitty gritty, but sometimes things get specialized so much that it becomes really hard. And especially in medicine, the more you specialize, that means the more you're committing to education. It means that you're delaying that big attending income, but you're also sacrificing more years in the academics trying to learn and be that expert in your field. The way I want to break up the specialties is probably starting with just organ systems. So there is literally a specialist for every organ in your body. You're going to have a neurologist, which is for the brain. You're going to have a cardiologist for the heart, a pulmonologist for your lungs. You're going to have a hepatologist, which is for your liver, a gastroenterologist, which is going to be for your stomach and your digestive system. You're going to have a urologist for the bladder. What other things? Oh, you're going to have a physical medicine and rehabilitation, which is usually more of like the musculature, physical aspect of it. There is also sports medicine, which is going to be more sports oriented. However, it is very much revolved around musculoskeletal ailments. And so those are the general things that we think of first.
To your point about specialists, sometimes I feel like I'm just being popped from one specialist to another specialist, where I almost wish that the doctor is just capable of doing like the things, right? So when I went to go see my gastro, it's actually because I had hernia issues. So I had to go get a hernia repaired. I went in for follow-up, and my hernia doctor was like, hey, actually, this pain in your side, I'm going to now send you to the gastro because that pain doesn't relate to what I was working on. It's completely different. And so you're going to have to go see somebody else to do that. You breaking it down by organ system is a good place to start. I have a broad question, and this may not be the right point to ask it, but I'm going to ask it just to establish a baseline. In the law, we have lawyers that are specialized in an area, like a category. And then we have lawyers that specialize in, let's say, a task. So you might have a lawyer that is really, really, really good at appellate arguments at the appellate court level, or you might have a lawyer who is really, really good at negotiating. So they're good at a certain task, and then you could take whatever category and give it to them, and they'll go do that task. What I understand is you can specialize in one of these organ systems, but then for the most part, you have to be prepared to do everything that relates to that organ system as far as monitor, prescribe medication, and then even get in there and do surgery. Is that on point with what's required when you are specializing in an organ system?
No, each organ, you're going to have that foundational work. So let's take let's talk about a pulmonologist, so a lung doctor. You're going to learn all the ins and outs of how the lung functions. How does it bring in air? How does the blood flow interact with the oxygenation? How do other systemic illnesses or ailments, how does that affect the lungs? And then you're going to learn interventions. You're going to learn procedures on how to do bronchoscopies. You're going to learn how to do thoracenteses. A lot of things revolve around the procedural aspects as well. So you learn all that during your fellowship. Once you then come out and as attending, just like a lawyer, you can then now specialize. You can say, hey, you know what? I really love cystic fibrosis. I'm going to just focus in on cystic fibrosis patients. They're going to come to me for their treatments. They're going to come for me for any sort of procedures that they need. And that's going to be my focus. However, I may have a very small percentage of my patients still be a general population. Maybe they'll come for me for COPD as well, or asthma. And I still want to manage those things to keep my breath still open. But there are some specialists who will focus in, and by the time they're 60s or 70s, they are the expert, and everyone knows that that's who you send for that particular ailment. So yeah, you can have both, and it really depends on the specific person and their training and their expertise. And really it comes down to what is needed in their area that they're practicing. Some people will move to a specific area to get into that niche, or they fall into the niche because that area is calling for it.
As far as procedures go, and this happened with the hernia, and it also happened with our pregnancy when I was seeing my doctor for the hernia. And I actually what doctor would I have seen for a hernia?
So majority of time, it's actually the general surgeon that you go see for a hernia repair. That's usually the case. Gastroenterologists will usually do colonoscopies, EGDs, or scopes. They'll evaluate the internal side, but anything on the outside is usually sent to the general surgeon.
Okay, so the general surgeon would be a bad example in this case. So I'm going to stick with our gynecologist for the birth. So one of my questions, because you go see the OB, and for clarification, is it OB-GYN or OB-GYN?
It doesn't matter, but the majority is OB-GYN, or OBGYN is usually more the normal, common vernacular, the way you say it.
Okay. I'll stick with OB-GYN. So we go see our OB-GYN, and you're doing the office visits, you're talking, she's monitoring the pregnancy in this case, and then she's also going to deliver the baby. So of course, in my mind, that makes sense. But then as we start talking about the possibility of a C-section that exists in any pregnancy, I had a question of, okay, in the instance that we have to go do a C-section, are you the one who does it, or are we being taken back to like a surgical team that's prepared for this, that specializes in that? And the response was was like, no, I'm the OB-GYN. If that's the case, I will go and I'll basically cut her open and get the baby out. And so in my mind, it was okay, you really need to be prepared for just the general. We're sitting in your office on a Tuesday morning down to, wow, you are actually having surgery on somebody that evening because of complications with the baby. You have to be prepared to do everything from having a simple office visit and build rapport with an individual all the way to this is an emergency situation. We have to cut somebody open.
And that's why I said at the beginning of this part of the question was OB-GYNs are considered part of that primary care umbrella. They're considered generalists because, like you said, they do clinic, they do hospital, they do procedures and surgeries. And so that's why they fall into that category because they are a generalist and they majority of them have to know a little bit of everything and maintain their skills to be able to do that. Some of them do decide, you know what, I'm only going to do clinic, I'm only going to do the gynecologic components of it, or maybe just OB up to a certain point and never deliver again. They have that opportunity as they grow in their careers. And I will say there is that leniency. So it's not completely strict that you're stuck forever. You can change. You can make some pivots here and there if you needed to, and if it makes sense.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. So when you're looking at these, you have the general specialties and then you have your categorical body parts. Are there any other specialties that exist outside of those realms? I'm sure you had mentioned cystic fibrosis. I'm sure there's ailments and other categories. So I want to open the floor to those other instances.
So I tried to make this as simple as possible. And I think that breaking it down to the organ systems was one of the easiest ways to do it. When we're not talking about the organ specialties, there are other specialties that are in other umbrellas. So things like anesthesia, emergency medicine, they're infectious disease. So these are not specific organs, but they are specialties or specialists within their own right. And then if you really wanted to get down to the nitty gritties, surgery is a whole nother umbrella that, again, there's orthopedic surgeons. Those are surgeons who work on the musculoskeletal and bones. They're cutting and breaking and repairing. There are general surgeons who are basically doing surgery on the visceral organs. So anything on the skin, deeper, anything in the abdomen, chest, like they should be able to do all of that entire gamut of procedures. But then they can specialize down into vascular surgery. So that's going to be blood vessels. So that's going to be putting stents in, removing clots, doing all very intense, minutia, detail-oriented procedures, like little small detailed tools. There's cardiothoracic, so that's going to be everything in the chest, the heart and the lungs. There's going to be a colorectal surgeon. They specialize in just doing all the different procedures around the stomach as well as the intestines, whether that's taking out cancer, whether that's dealing with Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, putting in a bag for you, a colostomy. Those are all things that you can break down further. And that's why when I was going through the list of specialists, I actually forgot like you can keep breaking it down and down further and further. There's a lot, and so that's why it's always interesting to see how a medical student, when you interview them at the very beginning, what their goals are, and then seeing where they end up. Sometimes it's the most random place that they never thought they would get to.
It's very similar to law. When you first talk to a 1L, a first year, they may say, I want to do this. And by the time they're actually practicing, they're doing something completely different just because of either what they learned along the way or opportunities that came up. We've talked about before, money influences a lot of things when you're trying to pay off that student debt, where maybe instead of hanging out your own shingle and starting fresh, you're like, well, I need to take this big law for, $250,000 a year. So things change. And I agree. It's fun to see where they end up and ask them what happened along the way. What brought you to this point in time?
Right. Another thing that I want to bring forth is there are certain specialties in medicine where you actually don't deal with patients at all. And so those go unheard of too, because again, patients don't see them, so there's no reason to know about them. But you have the pathologists. They are reviewing slides and blood work and just doing all the behind the scenes nitty gritty stuff. There's the radiologist who is reviewing all of your imaging. There is immunology is also another specialty. Again, an infinite amount of specialties that you can go into. And I don't necessarily think we need to break down like what they all do specifically, but knowing that the different umbrellas are primary care, specialists, and then it's breaking down the specialists in either a organ-based system or a non-organ-based system, and then the surgical umbrella is a whole nother group.
Now, is the other path also, because this exists in law, academic? Is academic a pathway as well as you're working your way through?
Academic is more of a employer type of a conversation. It's not necessarily a specialty because you can be a colorectal surgeon and be in academics, or you can be a family medicine in academics. It's basically where you work for and who you work for. You're going to be working for a university. That way you can teach the next generation of doctors, or you're going to be in private practice or corporate medicine where you're seeing your own patients, just doing your own thing rather than having to work with students or residents.
Is there a requirement that if you are teaching that you still need to be practicing?
There is a requirement for you to remain efficient and proficient in your field. So yes, there is usually a designated allotted time for you to continue practicing what you need to practice. Surgeons still need to be able to do surgery so that they can then teach their residents and their fellows how to do the surgeries that they're supposed to be experts in.
I would say that's very similar to law, where academics is always a pathway. And you can just be a law professor. You can just be a law scholar and never actually practice, but you still need to be aware of the laws and the changes in the laws and how to proficiently teach. But there are a lot of professors that come from practice. They're either doing it simultaneously, maybe as an adjunct, or they have the best life balance in the world to where they are still practicing at the firm and they are teaching at the same time. They have 1 or 2 classes that they teach a week on top of just formal practice, which is extremely impressive.
My new position that I'm stepping into here, hopefully in this next year, is that exact thing that you're talking about, is managing half the week as my own clinic, seeing my own patients, and then the other half of my time is going to be with residents in the hospital or in their clinic precepting. But I actually thought of a question that I wanted to ask you. Obviously, in medicine, we are very specialized, and if we deviate or do something from the norm, we have malpractice insurance to cover ourselves. For example, if I were a cardiologist, and then I did something inappropriate and decided to do something not involving the heart, instead something involving the lung, and something went wrong and this patient sues. That's clearly out of my specialty and I would get in big trouble. How does that work as a lawyer who says that they have specialized and then they attempt to potentially take a case on that they're not comfortable with or not used to doing, but they completely mismanage it and it doesn't go the right way? What happens there? Like, does the client get to sue that lawyer? Like, how does that work?
For the most part, I guess you can claim that you specialize in something. But again, specialization is for the most part just you are more knowledgeable about it because that's your focus. There are certain areas of certification that you can get. So in Texas, and I'm going to talk about family law specifically, if I wanted to be certified in family law, I can then do additional trainings. I have to show over the course of so many years that I've worked in family law. Basically, I have to show a good resume over the course of my career, maybe letters of recommendation from other attorneys or judges, and then go take, an additional written exam to get that certification, that additional certification that hangs on the wall next to your diploma that says, hey, I'm really good at family law. And that exists for a lot of different areas. But the thing about lawyers and our ethics and our bar admittance and so on and so forth is the rules pretty much apply to all the lawyers. You're allowed to be a bad lawyer. You are allowed to make poor arguments. You're allowed to not be able to object on time. You're allowed to stammer through an appellate argument. You're allowed to do these things. I mean, we're all human, but all lawyers are pretty much held to the same standard. And the professional responsibility, we actually have to take a professional responsibility test while in law school to understand what we need to do. Most of the time it's don't mess with the money. Don't do inappropriate things with your clients. If you're going to represent somebody, represent them to the best of your ability. So that means returning the phone calls, showing up to court. A lot of the things that people get in trouble for, you would assume are very basic things, like don't steal your client's money. Don't do that because you will face the repercussions for stealing your client's money. Show up at court. If you have a hearing, make sure you or a representative of you that is an attorney shows up for your client. Those are the things that get people in trouble. Just because you go try a case and you lost because of either the argument or maybe the law wasn't on your side and you were going to lose the case from the get-go. Some clients can sue their attorneys, and attorneys can actually sue their clients in some instances, but those are for contractual things. Most of the time there's no cause there. If I have a case, as I can show as a client, show extreme negligence or extreme disregard by the attorney I've hired, I really don't have cause. I can claim that my representation wasn't up to par, but we try to make sure that those safeguards are there, at least by the judge, to make sure that they're not having to go retry a case and they're still protecting the legal community. If a judge acknowledges the fact that somebody may not have the wherewithal to represent somebody, they're probably going to make a scene about it and try to get to the bottom of it. For instance, this was the first time I'd seen it in practice. We were doing a family law trial out in a different county. And literally in that county, they had stuff on the wall for the court rules, the district court rules. And for the district courts in that county, there was a requirement that if you were going to try a death penalty case as a defense attorney, you needed to meet these certain stipulations. You need to meet these certain requirements because they wanted to ensure that if we were going to put somebody to death, that they had the best representation that they could get, not somebody just coming straight out of law school saying, hey, I'll take this case. But there are instances in other jurisdictions where you could come out of law school and you can try a death penalty case. You can try a capital punishment case. And that's the craziness. Again, it's not the experience or the knowledge that gets you in trouble. It's the not doing everything by the book, by the law that gets you in trouble. So that's a very good question because we're all held to the same standard, whether you're a first-year associate or whether you've been out 30 years. The rules are pretty clear, and we're taught the rules in law school as to how to not mess up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good segue into some of the specialties in law. The easiest way to say it is if there's a theme in life, you can find a way to tie that back to a specialty in law. We think of the basics. We think of criminal law. We think of civil litigation. You're suing your neighbor. You're suing a company. There's family law, immigration law, tax law, real estate law. So those are the things that people generally think about. But then again, any theme in life, any category of life, there's probably something there. If you're near the ocean, there's maritime law. If you are in Hollywood, there's entertainment law. If you are dealing with sports, there's sports law. If you are dealing with construction, there's construction law. If you create a topic, you can probably find an area of law. If you're in the Northeast, there's national security law. So there's so many different areas of law that you can specialize in, or at least try to specialize in. As long as you can find an interest, it usually exists. But I mentioned earlier, there's also the procedures, there's the tasks of doing things. And so you can take a career path and then have it become your specialty. Mediation, you can only focus on being a mediator where you're a neutral third party. Appellate arguments, you can only focus on appellate arguments where you're not really dealing with the nitty-gritty trial work. You're making appellate arguments at the appellate court level or the Supreme Court level. You have people that are only specialize in jury selection. You have people that only specialize in drafting pleadings. They never talk to the clients, but they'll just draft pleadings, negotiations, they'll go close or closers. So sometimes you just have a skill set that's needed and you apply it to all these different categories of law, or you really specialize in that category of law and you can see whatever through from beginning to end.
I want to save this next question for our next episode, but I'm interested now that learning about all these different specialties that you've mentioned on the income or salary differences, right? Are you going to make more? Are you going to make less? But I want to table that question and just have you think about that the next time we get back together. I'm curious to see what that income disparity is among the different types of law that you can practice and whether that's something that is out in the open or not. Because I want to bring to the table the same thing. Like I'm sure a lot of our viewers are going to be very interested in what a surgeon makes, an orthopedic surgeon versus a neurosurgeon versus a family doc or a pediatrician. And then they would be surprised at the numbers that they're going to see. That would be a great episode in the future.
I completely agree. That's a very good topic because salaries are very important. They help really define our decisions at times, which it shouldn't be that way. Like it shouldn't, but it is, especially when we're bringing in so much student debt from our education.
Great. That was a great discussion about just specialties, and you enlightened me about all the different specialties within law. And I mean, I knew about it, but I didn't think about it that way. And so I appreciate the conversation we had. But this will end our episode here on the Medical-Legal Brief with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. And hopefully you guys tune in for all of our other episodes, things that you've missed potentially. But make sure you subscribe, follow, and comment on a lot of our content. And we'll see you on YouTube or Spotify. We post our videos on Wednesdays now. So we're looking at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays.
Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No,
This podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.